Hey, I'm Steve Carroll, and I'm here with Maoni. This is the next episode of Careers Behind the Code. Check it out. And we're here with Maoni this time. Hey, Maoni, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Maoni Stephens. I'm the owner of the .NET Garbage Collector.
Okay, and so this episode, sort of origin story, is that you just had your 20th anniversary, Microsoft anniversary.
Yep.
And so we were chatting about, as we often do in these sort of parties that we throw for the anniversaries, about like sort of your origin story. And I'm like, yep, doing this one. Yeah. So how long have you been actually on the garbage collector itself?
I think probably almost 15 years, not quite,
but
almost, yeah.
All right. So needless to say, like putting this in the sort of corpus that we're putting together of the show is like, you are a deep technical expert. You're sort of the GC architect at this point. Is that the way you would think about it? As like, you said
architect
owner.
And tech lead, because we actually have other people working on GC now.
Right. Yes. You've been an army of one.
Exactly,
but right now you think of yourself as sort of like taking this sort of technical lead position on it. So I'm hoping this will be particularly interesting to people who are like after that path of they want to become a deep technical expert.
Right.
I think this is also like in communion with like the episode that we did with Fowler, who's David Fowler, who's like the architect for the ASP.NET. So this is like our second architect one. So it'll be like interesting to see sort of both the things that are the same and the things that are different.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start. Let's do a quick overview of like how you got into this. Like, okay, so there was 5 years at the beginning there. What did you do in those 5 years?
So I actually started in dev.
Okay.
So I worked on a product that later failed, but I was able to see that it was failing, so I took off.
So in other words, you came into the company in dev, which is where we are. This is developer division for everybody.
Yeah, right. Which is the division we're in now. Right. So then I went to the OS group. I joined the app compat team, the application compatibility, which was a big deal because XP was the second NT-based operating system. Right after NT.
Yeah, to care about compatibility at the second time around.
Exactly. So like people had a lot of, especially games. Like we're talking like consumer products that worked on 9X. Yeah. Fortunately, I didn't need to deal with 9X, but that didn't work on XP. So
9X, I think, is like that's like Windows 95, not Windows 98. Is that right?
95, 98.
Okay.
Millennium, I think, even. Like that's.
Let's not talk about that.
Right.
No, that's a joke. We'll tell lots of nasty stories about it.
So XP, App Compat was an important feature in XP. So that's when we actually made people's favorite games work again on an NT-based system. So that was my job before I came to CLR team.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. And then and then you joined the CLR team, I think, as a PM.
Yes.
Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Can you see me as a PM?
I can see you as a dev. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. So what happened was I was in the OS team and. I was working on the technology for compatibility, and it's not a. I mean, compared to the GC is way more complicated piece of technology, and I felt like I didn't really have quite a lot of room to grow because I was a junior dev, but I was already considered the expert
in the compatibility field of, like,
so
Kim Helsing's role.
I was like. I don't want to be the expert here. I want to learn a lot of stuff, right?
Okay.
There's so much I could learn. So after a while, I told myself that I need to go somewhere where I'm not the expert.
Got it.
And I looked around, and I've always been fascinated about perf work. And just naturally, I'm just attracted to working on performance. And I looked around at the company, and CLR had an opening on a perf team. So we had a perf org. Kind of as part of the CLR team, we actually had a perf dev team, perf test team, and a perf PM position. And the guy who was the PM just left, so they were looking for someone.
I see.
So I wanted to be, I was a dev on the OS team, but I was like, well, I had never been a PM before. And at that point, I would say I was probably like 70% sure that I didn't want to be a people manager, but being a PM is sort of a good, gives you a taste of that.
I see. Get close. Like it's not the same, but you get close enough to get a sense.
I wouldn't need to manage people, but I get a taste of how to work on project management side of things. So I was like, oh, this is a good opportunity. So I interviewed and I came to a CLR team as a PM. And then, as you have heard, that I was a PM for 9 months. And then I'm not a PM. It was clear. So that was my PM journey. and then I switched back to being a dev.
Okay, and then like I want to really stress for folks like what like the area that you kind of work in and like how it's worked out for you. So like in the garbage collector, you handle not only like how are we going to develop what the next one is going to be or add features to it, but you also do like a ton of like forensic work, right?
Yes. So investigation, that's a big part. So I did basically everything. I mean, I had a tester for various times, but not even for the whole time I was the GC dev. So I did, design, implementation, fixing bugs, perf investigation, crash investigation, tooling work. That was very important. I actually spent quite a bit of time on tooling. So also, community type of things, blogging, giving talks, and all that.
Like in helping other people understand how to like make their applications work better with the designs that we had.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. And I think another important part of what you kind of do day to day is making sure that like when there's a really bad customer problem, like something goes wrong, like let's say we break, not that this ever happens, but like we break something, right? Either a release goes out or whatever, and there's an emergency on a customer thing. A lot of times you'll get brought in.
I mean, this especially happens.
Sometimes. Don't make it sound like it's all the time, right?
It happens a lot more frequent during the earlier days because granted, we didn't have as good tooling, right? We didn't have, and GC, obviously, because I like to think I made it better, right? During all these years. So we were in a worse situation before. So I would be in, there are times where people would come to me and they were fairly angry. They would be like, hey, Maoni, we got a memory problem. They're using, .NET. And the worst part was they were all very stressed out because they were like a week away from shipping. I actually literally had teams that said like, we need to ship in a week. We had this showstopper.
Like internal teams.
Internal teams, yeah. We had showstopper. The memory, either the memory usage was too much or like the GC pause was too long. Something around the managed memory area. So I was stressed out because I was under extreme time pressure to work on either basically tell them what's wrong, right? That's the first order of things. Like I had to debug it to figure out what is wrong. I mean, most of the time it was something that they could fix on their side, right? But sometimes it required me to make a fix, and that was very stressful. So I was thinking to myself, how can I make my job more enjoyable? Right.
And certainly less stressful.
Right. Because I know I had, at that point, I knew I had a good foundation, meaning that I knew that I was working on the thing that I like. I was doing the kind of work I liked, right? Because when I was a PM, it was pretty obvious, like, as I mentioned to you before, that the most happy memories I had of being a PM were doing dev work, right?
Right.
So I knew at that point when I was working on GC, I really loved working on something like a GC, and I was back to being a dev. So that was, I felt like I had the foundation part done, right? But of course, we're working at a company, which meant you have to work on problems like this, which is not necessarily like maybe the thing you like to work on the most, right? But you have to be able to work on problems like these. So I was like, how can I make it more enjoyable?
Got it. It's almost like the incentive structure was set up such that you knew that what you really wanted to be doing was maybe a little bit less of the fire drilling.
Right, exactly.
And so that sort of put you in a position where you were very well incented to get the right tooling and the right logging and the right things.
Yeah,
and indeed to even create this sort of corpus of things that you could educate customers about so they could kind of self-heal.
Yeah, so I actually created a program called Customer Assistance Program. The goal of it was, well, there's two reasons. One is for GC's own benefit, because I felt like if you look at my interactions with customers, I mean, yes, like mostly with the first-party partner teams, they came to me when they had a fire drill going on, and I would help them fix a problem. They're happy, and then they disappear for like months or years, right? And then sometimes I would
then
be
you're
like,
happy because they disappear. No.
Well, not necessarily, yeah. So I was like, I was working on new like perf features, and I was thinking like, oh, it could benefit this team that I worked with, and I would go to them, and they're like, sorry, we're busy now. We can't try out your private build or what have you. So I thought about this, I'm a problem solver, so I look at everything that doesn't go smoothly in my life that I cared about as, is the problem I want to solve, right? It's the same as solving technical problems. So I was like, what can I do there? So I wanted to build kind of an ongoing work relationship with them. Right. So I said, how about, I've debugged a lot of perf problems. I see the patterns, right? So I had the test team at the time had a summer intern, the very bright, I think he was like 18 years old. He was about to go into college. So he worked, I was very impressed by him. So he and I worked on this, the CAP, customer assistant program together, like a prototype of it.
Sure.
So I wrote an issue diagnostics engine, which basically encapsulated the patterns I've seen that were problematic.
I see.
And
You're kind of trying to automate the kind of analysis that
exactly,
you do manually.
Right. So then it tells you this is the sort of things that you can do to make progress.
Maoni in a box.
That's what, you're definitely not the first one to say that. Yes, right. So I did that, and he worked on the front end. So he built a website where you could, take, ETW traces, and then you can do filtering and all that to find the ones that you want, and then you can see the results that came out of the diagnostics engine, right? So I sort of pitched this to management. I remember, going into meetings and showing this to Raja and the managers, and because I wanted more resources to work on this. And I showed it to our customers. I was like, hey, if you send me traces regularly, right? Because they all collect perf data. It's just a matter of, getting them to send the perf data, the right ones, to me, right, on a regular basis.
And getting it configured, right, so you get the right providers on, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So after a while, I was able to get more devs to work on it, and I was actually able to get a PM resource on it. So that was very useful because he started talking to all
Because you sure
this.
didn't want to do it.
No,
we had learned
because we had already established that. I didn't. No, I do enjoy talking to customers. I mean, I actually work with, especially customers who are not in our team, a lot. So I probably do that probably more. I'm probably one of the devs in CLR that do that the most.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that if you're a performance person working in our top customers, or if you're a performance person here, when we say first party, we always mean another team at Microsoft, right?
Right.
Those people, they have you in their virtual Rolodexes.
Yeah. So he started talking to a bunch of first party teams that I had worked with before, and then got them enrolled in this in this program. So we started getting traces, and one thing about perf is that people would come to you when the perf problem is out of control.
Yeah.
Right. But for people who work on a specific part of the product, that I can already see the sign of the perf problem without you observing it, right? Because I know the pattern, I know what to look for. So I was able to tell them hey, it may not be a problem that you detect right now, but I can tell you that it could get bad, right? So, and here's a fix. Can you try it, right? So what?
I see.
Yeah.
So now they had a reason to take a minute out of their busy day to talk to you, right?
Right. Yeah. Whereas before they're we're busy. I mean, everybody's busy. We have endless work to do, right? You can't blame them. But now they had a reason to do it. So I was able to get, sort of hey, I can show you the business impact, which interestingly enough had a nice side effect for my career, since we're talking about career, right?
We're going to get there.
Right. So for the longest time, because I was working mostly with external teams, meaning, first party and sometimes third party. And back then we had very long shipping cadence, right? Yeah. So it would take 3 years to get a version out. So my review would look something like, well, you did some work in the past review cycle, but we don't see any business impact. We haven't
harvested the benefit of it yet, so is it really good?
Right.
Okay.
So, but then by the time people would upgrade to the version that you shipped, it's already been at least 18 months.
Since you did the work.
So I was like, hey, I'm showing the business impact here. They're like, but you didn't do the work in the past review cycle.
I see.
I was like,
So it was you were able to bring the benefit more immediately within that 1 year horizon.
Yeah. So that was, I thought that was, I mean, I never intended for the program to do that, but it turned out to be a nice side effect.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by the way that small things in the way you run things like performance management systems and stuff like that it can really have these massive ripples through the way people do their work in order to. Yeah. Cool. All right, so let's start doing the walking backwards thing.
Okay.
So what do you think of, like, from now going backwards? When was the last time you felt like there was either a major thing that you had to learn or that you had a significant pivot in your career, and how did you navigate it?
So the latest one would be since we mentioned in the beginning that now there's other people who work on GC, so that was definitely a change for me. Right, because I used to be a sort of one-person army.
Yeah.
I did everything. I knew, all the code, obviously, because I wrote it. But now there's multiple people, and I had to adjust to that.
Okay.
As in that, actually, one of the things I didn't want to do at all was micromanagement, because I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to be
resists it, right?
Yeah. So I think throughout my career there was probably one manager I had who tried to micromanage me, and that didn't go very well. And this was not even the CLR group, which meant I was very junior at the time, and I already didn't like it.
I see.
So I
even
sort
before
of,
you'd kind of established a reputation for expertise.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to do my own thing, naturally. So I wanted to, treat other people the way I want to be treated, right? So I tend to just I don't want to be in your way. Like we talked about what you need to do. I'll just hands off and you go do your own thing. But sometimes that turned out to be not the right thing to do, because they do require more interaction, and before they sort of stray off too much, that kind of thing. So I had to adjust the amount of interaction that I had with the members of the GC team.
I think it comes down to this idea that so the golden rule is treat others as you wish that they would treat you, but then there's this there actually is a next level beyond that, which is that a lot of people don't want you to be, they're not you, so they don't want to be treated the way you do.
That's actually something that, interesting enough, that something I learned, I felt like that benefited me a lot in my career, is to understand exactly that. Not everybody's the same, right? Some people are great at some things and not so great at others, and vice versa. So just because something seems easy for you doesn't mean it's easy for everybody else, and vice versa. Something might be very easy for them, might be very hard for me. So, yeah.
Okay, so that was relative. That sort of change we're talking about is relatively recent.
Yeah.
When was the last time before that where you?
I feel like that's when the cap thing that we just talked about.
Yeah, was
where
cap.
I had to take some care in my career in order to. Keep doing what I wanted to do, because I wanted to keep my job enjoyable. Right?
Have you ever considered my assumption is that at least. We were just talking about you read GC papers for fun even, right? There's not a lot of confusion about what the domain that you want to be working on, right? So has that always been true? How long has that been true?
I think shortly after I started working on GC, that was very obvious to me. I mean, even at the time, so my predecessor, Patrick, right? He was both the architect and dev before I joined the team. And actually,
this is Patrick Dessoud.
Yeah. So it's interesting because even though my PM journey ended up as sort of a failure, but one thing that came...
It evolved.
Evolved, okay, that's a better word.
We'll go with
more
that.
Positive,
I'll manage this stuff for you. It's all good.
Yes. So one really good thing that came out of that was when I was doing dev work as a PM, I worked with Patrick, because he was the chief architect for CLR, and he's also a perf person. Right? We both share those.
Was he on the perf team when you joined the?
No, he was more up one level.
Got it.
So I think he actually had a architect team under him that was for the whole group.
That was looking at it as he was the architect, whereas you were on the perf team.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But because he really liked perf work as well, he worked with whoever was doing perf work, right? So I worked with him, and he apparently, I guess I impressed him enough, because I'm sure he could have had his pick at whoever he wanted to be pass his torch to. But
was that formal? Is that a thing where it's Patrick was literally saying I must find my Padawan?
I think
or
he
whatever,
had. So I asked him one time when I was I think this conversation came up when he was explaining something to me, and as I mentioned, GC is quite a bit more complicated than any that I had worked on before the GC, right? So he was explaining something to me, and he explained maybe twice, and I still didn't get it, and I got frustrated because I was sort of used to, I
just get it.
Right, I just get it, yeah. So I was like, why did you pick me? And I was like, why? There's lots of devs in CLR. Like, why did you pick? I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. Patrick, he just looks at me for a while. He's like, believe me, I've tried with other people before.
I see. Was this a long time later, or is this happening in the moment when you're...
It's very early on. It's very shortly after I started working on GC. So when I first started on GC, my job was to fix stress bugs. So we had, SQL, because I came toward the end of 2.0. That's when SQL CLR started.
This is 2003.
No, it's after that. After that.
I know 2 was the first version of that shipped while I was still
right,
there.
Yeah. So it's after maybe
2005,
yeah. So SQL CLR put CLR in a situation that it was never put in before. Because, SQL people, they tend to, I want to use the very last byte of the memory I get. So these are latent bugs that had been in GC.
I'm trying to decide if we have to explain what SQL CLR is. I think we do. So SQL CLR is you basically host the CLR inside the SQL Server.exe process so that you can use manage DLLs so you can write your storage procedure in there.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. Yeah. So because SQL ran in such a stressful situation, they started to expose a lot of stress bugs, are obviously very hard to debug. And I, as a dev that just newly came into the space, I was assigned stress. That was my job for a while, right? Which meant I needed to understand the GC details or internals very fast, right? So I would go ask, I would stare at a dump for 4 hours trying to formulate some kind of hypothesis, and I would go talk to him, and then we would discuss what could be going wrong, that kind of thing. So I got very frustrated at one time. I was just like, why did you, right? So then he's like, yes, I have tried with other devs before.
I see. And so it's kind of even though on the inside for you, it felt this is so frustrating. Why can't I get it? So, from his perspective, it's but you're getting it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. I think that's what went on. So then after I had, I felt like I was a little bit on the, maybe required more confidence at the beginning because it's just a lot harder than I was dealing with before, and I had to get up to speed so fast.
I see.
But as soon as I got over that, I just, it just kind of took off.
Let me ask you, is it fair to say that in like you said, you in some ways weren't feeling like you were being super challenged in your previous roles?
Right.
And then, and that was for a good couple of years, right?
Actually, it was later part of the couple of years. When I first joined the OS team, of course, everything was still new to me.
Yeah, and
so
then you kind of
lot.
felt like you got to some plateau.
Right.
And you weren't learning as quickly as,
yes.
And I also think it's really interesting that you identified that, right?
Yeah.
You got, that never has happened in my career. I've never gotten to a point where, because they keep moving me around, and so I never got to that sort of place.
Yeah.
People inject other challenges into my world, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really interesting that you identified it, and then at that point you went and you took a leap.
Yep. I think I gave myself 3 months.
I see.
After and there's one conversation that really just struck me that kind of solidified the realization.
Yeah.
I mean, I had already been thinking about it, but my dev manager at the time, he made a comment. He's like, Maoni, you're the expert of my group. He said as a form of compliment.
He's
like,
guy.
Right. Yeah. He said you're such a valued member of my team, right? He said that as a compliment. But I was thinking but I'm just kind of a junior dev. I don't want to be I want to be valued and a valued member of the team, but I don't want to be seen as you
wanted to open the world up.
Right, yeah. So I was like, I don't want to, I don't really want to be in this situation anymore. I want to go somewhere where there's so much for me to learn, so I can feel like I am being challenged, right? So then I told myself that, I'll give myself a few months to just look around at the company because Microsoft is a big company, right? I didn't necessarily need to look outside, and then I found CLR.
I see. And then even when you were kind of hit with the challenge of like ramping up on this area that you were kind of, that you, I think probably rightly, I would agree, are assessing is significantly more complex. It seems like you were able to use some sort of inherent confidence to get you through the dark times. Is that like?
So the first year I spent on App Compat team in the OS group, I spent it debugging.
I see.
So, and I didn't debug scenarios like, how, you run a test, right? It was pass in, and maybe yesterday someone deployed a new build, it failed, so you're asked to debug that. That's not the kind of stuff I debugged.
Right.
I debugged stuff where you just take a random app, it failed, it cannot run on XP, and then completely arbitrary points, right? So you need to figure that out. And of course, you don't have symbols to the app code. I mean, we had symbols to the OS code.
OS, but you didn't know what was going on.
So that's the sort of the things that I debugged. So like the debugging part actually didn't faze me. Like when I came to GC, I was like, you get a stress bug, fine, but I'll debug it. It's not a.
Got it.
Yeah.
This is another thing where I gotta pause us for a minute because like I'm realizing a connection here, which is I asked in episode 1, and if you haven't seen episode 1 of Careers Behind the Code with David Fowler, please go check it out. What he said was like one of the most important things he ever learned from any other person was actually that skill, the ability to kind of go and debug. And so here we are again, and it seems like it's this pattern in anybody who kind of gets to that level of awesomeness in the IC career path that inevitably at some point you learn that. How do you dig into code that you have no idea about and learn to navigate your way around? How did you learn how to do that so that the junior dev watching this who idolizes you wants to become that person? How did you learn the skill?
Part of it just, kind of logical reasoning, right? I believe that a lot of us possess, right? You just need to apply that into the situation. And then part of it is to, I had my manager at the time, he was this guy who was awesome at debugging. Like when I first joined the team, I remember seeing these scenarios where we would have team meeting, right? Somebody would say like, oh, I've been looking at this and this, I just haven't figured it out. And he would go in and he could figure it out. So I really learned from him.
Like over the shoulder kind of situation?
No, well, he would go in and debug and tell us how he did it.
I see. Yeah, he would explain the methodology he used.
Right, yeah. And sometimes I just kind of went to him. I was like, hey, I have this situation, right? I'm thinking I could try this, this, and this. And he would tell me like, oh, I think this would yield the most results. So we would talk about it, and he would tell me like what made him say that, right? So I learned a lot from him. And I learned a lot about using WinDBG and CDB. So that was important, very important.
Got it. So it's the debugging tools that also is exactly what Fowler said.
Yeah, right.
So it's almost like I have this I get asked a lot by early career people, like, what advice do you have for somebody who's early in their career? And I always tell people, and now you've made me, I'm going to change what I tell people.
Okay.
So in the old days, my story was always the same, which is when you pick your first job, you want to pick your first job based on who's going to do your code reviews so that they can break you of all the habits and help you see all the things that you can't even see that you're doing wrong, right? But maybe we need to expand that idea, right? Maybe what it is it's like you need somebody to review your code, and then you need somebody to teach you not just how to debug your code, but debug code.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you can find the person who can teach you that, or at least augment your own problem-solving skills with tools.
Right. So I think it's very important that you have somebody that you can talk about this with, because you can sit in your office and think about all the approaches, right? And then when you talk to someone, they might say oh, maybe I've debugged this sort of problems before, and here's a fresh new perspective that you have not thought of before. There's actually another thing I wanted to mention, which is I feel like another aspect to being a good debugger is that you should be persistent. And that's important to mention because I have worked with junior devs in the recent years where they would feel like, oh, if I'm assigned a bug that I cannot figure out by the end of the day, I just feel like I haven't accomplished anything today, and that's frustrating to me. So I told them, I was like, do you feel like you understand this bug more today than you did yesterday? Because if you do, that's progress. You should be happy about that, right? Honestly, this bug may take you a week, who knows, maybe even a month. I've seen experienced that excellent debuggers that took 2 months to debug one really, really hard to debug bugs. They never got, they may get frustrated a little bit, but they never thought of giving up. So I always tell people that, as long as you're making progress, this is good, right? You can still get frustrated all you want, but don't give up. Don't feel like you didn't accomplish anything.
Okay, so now that makes me want to go back to where we were before I first on this thing, which is have you always been confident? I don't know. I feel like these are the if you look at the stories as they're sort of piling up, it's in a lot of places it's places where you kind of knew you could do it, and you knew you could push through, and that's what you want to tell people. But do you feel like you've always had that? Or
I feel like I'm always the kind of person who, if it's something I care about, that I care to do well in, I've always been the kind of person that believed that I could eventually do it.
I see.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, I was going to high school in China.
Okay.
And my homeroom teacher told my mom, and he said, because I wasn't that interested in school at the time, so I didn't really do well. And then he told my mom, he's like, Maoni could probably get into a okay university if she chose so in China back then, I don't know if they still do it now, but back then at some point in high school, you choose which direction you want to go in. So either you go into STEM, right? The science, math, physics, chemistry, or you go into literature. So Chinese history and chemistry was the part of the STEM. So Chinese, English, I think history were the other direction you could go into. He totally did not believe I could do science, right? So he said
because you were just not focused.
I was not right. I was not really interested in school in general, and he believed that science is harder. That's why he believed that I couldn't do science.
I see.
Right. So he told my mom that he's like, I suggest Maoni go into literature, then she can probably get into an okay university. But if she goes into science, it's just kind of hopeless, right? So my mom told me that. I was like, I'm gonna show him. I'm going to go into science. Just because he said that, I'm going to go into science now. So,
So go with yes on the confidence thing.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we're jumping around. That's fine. It's great. Any other big places where you feel like there were pivots?
Let's see. I think that at some point, I just realized
we got all the way back to middle school, but
Yeah, I was thinking, starting middle school, what I did in college. So actually, I did a degree in chemistry. I didn't do computer science. But then in the end part of doing chemistry, I just realized that I didn't want to be doing this for the rest of my life.
Sure.
So then I was thinking, what else am I interested in? So I made the realization that I was interested in computers. But, I didn't really do all that much with computers at the time.
Is this in college?
This is after college.
Right after college.
So, yeah. So then I went, so I was in Canada at the time. And I was like, maybe I'll just take a couple computer science classes in the nearby university, right? So I lived in Halifax, and there's.
Okay.
So I went there, and I realized that I was very interested in that. And I went to talk to this professor. I was like, can I come take your class? And he's like, do you have the prerequisite for it? I was like, no. And he said, well, why it's called prerequisite? You need to take it before you. So I was like, how about this? You let me be in your class and for a month. At the end of the month, if you feel like I'm not keeping up with the rest of the class, just kick me back to that prerequisite class. He's like, okay. I think he was probably kind of surprised to have So, of course, I was perfectly capable of keeping up with the class, and I think I was first place at the end of the semester. And so from there, I knew that this is something I wanted to do. So then...
Do you feel like you just weren't exposed to it early enough to have caught the bug?
Yeah, I didn't have really any reasonable exposure to it earlier on.
I see. And so it's almost like the second you got exposed to it, you know it was your thing.
Exactly.
It was your
like
jam.
when I moved to Canada, I had a lot more opportunities to be exposed to computer-related stuff, right? And I happened to we had this like chat group, local chat group, and it just so happened that a lot of people in that chat group were doing computer science or had already had a computer-related job.
That's right.
So I was like, oh, I'm talking to these people about all these interesting things. This is what I should be doing. So that's when I realized.
Okay, now I have to laugh because in the time I talked to Miguel, De Casa, episode 2, check it out.
Yeah.
He credits like a lot of his career to like IRC.
I was on IRC.
Are we talking about IRC again?
The local chat group I mentioned is
an
on
IRC channel?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just randomly found it, right? I was looking for people to because I just moved there. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll join this chat channel. I think it's called a channel. So I talked to a bunch of people. They're all just like,
everybody in IRC is a nerd.
90% of people in that group are computer nerds.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There was somebody who was not a computer nerd is actually my big revelation that on IRC in the 90s. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so.
Awesome. All right. One other thing I want to talk about is, I want to focus a little bit more on the mentorship thing, right? Like, so was that just like working side by side for a long time? Did Patrick have like a curriculum for you?
No,
was it like
absolutely not.
Just, trying to increase challenges that you were taking on as time went by?
I think it's mostly, the interaction was mostly driven by me.
Okay,
so
you pulled.
Right, because I was, after I joined, or after I started on GC, I was the dev for GC, right? So obviously he still played a architect role, but any GC dev-related things that came to me, right?
Did he write the V1 GC, and then you kind of took the code over from there and evolved it, or is it?
Yeah, he wrote the GC in V1, right? And he actually wrote it in Lisp to begin with, and then he wrote a converter to convert to C++ code. Our GC, it is C++, but it could almost be compiled as C code.
Got it.
You could tell, like in the early days, there's like multiple parentheses that
clearly
was from a Lisp.
From the converter from Lisp.
That his parser did not detect the.
Awesome.
I mostly just managed like what my interaction was with him. So if I think our typical interaction would be something like, I was looking at a problem, right? At the beginning, it was hard to do architectural kind of things, right? So I would be looking at a problem, I would be like, well, I was trying to kind of think why things were done this way.
Sure.
And then I would ask him, I was like, why didn't we do this other thing? Like, what about these other ideas? And, then he and I would talk about ideas, and that was really beneficial to increasing the understanding of just garbage collectors technology.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, that's really neat. Do you have any advice that you would give to somebody who's like trying to find that mentor? Like I'm trying to think about, like, in the story, like you identified you wanted to do perf, you got to perf, you kind of found the mentor, but like, do you have any advice for people who might be in that phase of their career trying to figure out how to accelerate?
So I think it depends on like what you're looking for in a mentor, right? I feel like Patrick was definitely my technical mentor. Although I would say like I also just learned a lot about engineering in general from him, because he's an excellent engineer, not just in computer science, but in a lot of other things.
He can drive trains.
Electric and So I learned a lot of just engineering discipline or principles from him.
Got it.
So that was super useful, and I feel like that's important as a junior dev to find somebody who could help you with that. Because you can write code, you can learn how to debug, sure, but you also need somebody to teach you these like principles. Like,
do you mean like in the sense of large scale design? Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like how to think about, like, for example, how to break down a really complicated problem into manageable pieces. How to decouple things. Like when I first started work on GC, like one of the things that Patrick would always talk about that at first I just had no idea what he was talking about, because this was not something I had ever encountered in my previous, software development jobs, right? He would talk about like policy and mechanisms. So, I remember I was definitely not the only one. Like, I remember sitting in a meeting with him and one other person who was definitely more senior than me at the time. He just like, what do you mean policy mechanism? What does all this mean, right? So then he would explain. Then that made me realize, like, yeah, there is a benefit in separating them.
And in some ways, raising the abstraction level, like so that you're thinking about it in terms of.
Right. Yeah. So then I also had other mentors who were not about technical stuff, but about helping me just grow as a person.
Okay.
So for example, Raja, he was I think I owe a lot of my interpersonal skill improvements to him.
And we should say for the so that's Raja Krishnaswamy,
yes,
right? Who was the director of .NET before.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you know, as I mentioned, like, you know, when I first started working, I was not very good at interacting with people, right? I was kind of an awkward person and didn't exactly know how to get message through to other people. So
like
Raja's
influence skills?
Influence without authority.
Yeah.
Right. So, and as you can see, like my PM career was, a lot of that is about influencing without authority, and I completely failed at that. So Raja was the one who really taught me a lot of, you know, how you can interact with people to really understand what they want. Because a lot of the time people would say something, they would be like, I want you to do this, but it turned out that's really not what they want at all. They think, because they don't really understand your area as much as you do. Right, they're just making a suggestion that probably the first thought that popped into their mind that may not be the right thing to do at all. So you really need to understand why they're asking this question. So Raja gave me this piece of advice, and he said, no matter how wrong you think somebody is, or you know somebody is, don't get defensive. Just acknowledge that this is the way they think and ask questions. So that's, I think that's a very important piece of advice that I want to share.
Got it.
And he told me another thing, which was, if you do this enough, it would become your second nature. It wouldn't feel like not genuine, because if you feel like, oh, I'm only doing this because I don't want to get you mad at me, that just feels kind of awkward, right?
This is sort of like the fake it until you make it kind of concept of you just have to keep doing it.
You keep doing it, and then
it'll be awkward at the beginning, but eventually you'll stop.
I think I wouldn't even phrase it as like fake it on, you know, because as you keep doing it, you realize that it truly brings benefits.
I see.
So it's not just like, oh, I'm used to talking to people this way now. It's more like, I'm actually, you know, gaining benefit for both my side and their side. So as I can see that, hey, this is this results in something that's really good. That's something that helps, you know, pushing things along. Then you want to do it. You know, it's not a matter of like, oh, well, I need to change my interacting, you know, style with people. It's more like, this is actually getting problems solved. So I should naturally go with this instead of my previous style, right? So I thought that was like such excellent, you know, advice that I.
How long did you have to keep doing it until you felt like it became innate?
Maybe, I don't know, less than a year, I would say.
Okay.
Definitely less than a year.
Not 3 times.
Yeah.
Like
not
a year's
3 times,
worth of repetition.
Because I had to practice doing this the right way, right? You know, I mean, sure, I could ask questions, but how do you ask the right questions?
Got it.
How do you actually get the answers that would help solve the problem? So I had to practice that a bunch before I got to the point where, you know, today if somebody says, you know, complains to me, I don't get annoyed at all. I'm just like, hey, I just want to learn, you know, why you feel this way, right? You know, what were you doing? Like, what is your goal of doing this? I think often when I start having a conversation with someone, they might be quite mad, but by the end, they're just like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems like you.
That's funny. I guess I never really thought about the fact that most of the time, when somebody new comes into your world, they're probably most of the time irate, and that would really be an interesting way to live life. Because they don't get you unless there's something wrong.
Right. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. So just to wrap up, so I think you may have just answered the "What's the best career advice you've ever gotten" question. Is that basically what it is?
I would say that's definitely 2 of the best career advice that I've gotten.
Got it.
Yeah.
Have you ever gotten any career, like one of the hypotheses behind this show is that most career advice is bad, is only applicable to, you know, some situations, and in some cases it's like bragging, right? Like,
Yeah.
but at the same point, have you ever gotten like career advice that you feel like was absolutely bad that you're glad you avoided or you tried to do? And
I feel like if I hear something that is bad or would generate some kind of bad consequences,
you usually catch it early enough?
I don't think I ever applied anything where I was like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have followed that person's advice.
I always feel like you have to find examples where you tried something that and it was positive, and also try to find those examples of things where you tried it and it didn't work. Both are valuable, right?
I think I'm not sure it's a worst advice, but I have gotten into a situation where people told me that there's nothing I could do. They just said like, you know, this is the way things are, you know, you should just try to go with it. But I was like, but I'm not happy about the current situation. They're like, well, you know, it's up to you then. So I try to do something myself in that situation, and generally, you know, to keep my job enjoyable. I feel like at the end of the day, that's what we all want.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
So.
That is a fantastic place to end. So thank you, Maoni.
Thank you.